Welcome to the Atlanta Men's Workshop speaker and workshop recordings. Atlanta Men's Workshop is held every spring and fall at the Rock Eagle 4-H campus in Eatonton, Georgia. That's just about an hour east of Atlanta, Georgia. Please visit our website at atlantamensworkshop.com or see the link below to find dates and details to join us. Partial scholarships are available to those in need. We hope you enjoy this presentation, and we hope you will come join us at the Rock. Until then, we shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then.
Well, good morning, Eagle Rock 81. My name is Ron, and I'm an alcoholic. I was so looking forward to getting up here with a special water that the other speakers had. They didn't bring me one. So I know where I stand. After that introduction, I'm wondering if I can live up to that. You know, I have to disagree with one thing that he said, probably a lot of things he said, but one thing in particular. We run into special people in AA on this broad highway of happy destiny all the time, don't we? I've met some wonderful people here this weekend, and we've had a fantastic weekend thus far. I want to encourage you to try to get the travel plans out of your head for a few minutes, and let's be here, let's be present. I'd like to start, I'm a praying person, I'd like to start with a short prayer, kind of my version of the set-aside prayer. If you would, if you're a praying person, you can join me. God, I just ask you to remove me from this equation, remove my thoughts and my agenda with your thoughts and your agenda. Speak through my mouth the message you would have us to hear today. Open hearts and minds for that message that we can all leave this place a little changed, not the same as we came. Amen. So my sobriety date, I better hit this start button or else we're going to be here all day. My sobriety date is August 28th, 1991. I didn't come in voluntarily. I had some people call it a nudge from a judge. It was a little bit more forceful for me. If I wanted to stay out on bond, I had to have a piece of paper signed. Before I get into everything, it should be, it's appropriate for me to thank Alan, thank Josh for his kind words, thank the committee for inviting me. It's really a God thing that I'm here. A couple people from Florida talked about, the difficulties getting here. The roof, part of my roof blew off. I was in the path of the, thank you, sir. Part of our roof blew off and the pool cage caved in. Well, maybe that's an overstatement. Some of the screens came off and pavers collapsed, and we didn't have power, and roads were closed, and there was no gas, and all those kind of things. So Thursday, I was planning on coming up. Of course, the storm hit on Wednesday. So as I went to bed Thursday night, I was just praying, God, if it's your will that I go up there, just open the roads and give us power. 4:15 in the morning, we got power. I heard the roads were open. I did a little Google searches and was unsure if I was going to have enough gas to get here because the gas stations were closed. They had been run on and they were empty. So my wife and I talked about it, and I'm still wiping the footprint off of my hiney where she kicked me out the door and told me to go. So I came, and of course, obviously, I got here. The gas shortages are still in existence, so those of us that are driving back to Florida, especially Mid or South Florida, may have a hard time at it. So as the man said earlier, please keep us in your prayers and your thoughts this afternoon as we head that way. Man asked me if I was qualified to speak and share my story. I am, and I'm going to tell you why I'm qualified. Part of the reason why I think speakers, it's so important for us to qualify is after we've been sober for a little while, we don't look the same as when we came in. And people say, I don't look like an ex-con. I don't look like a career criminal. I don't look like a drunk. And I'm not. I was. I'm still an alcoholic, and I will be until the day I die. But I have changed because of the work in Alcoholics Anonymous, and because of these steps. I'm no longer the man that walked in these rooms 33 years ago. As I said, my sobriety date was back in 1991. I was, at that time, a 4-time felon, looking at getting another one. I have spent a total of 27 years in the Florida State prison system. One of the first prisons I went to, because I was a violent offender, was called Rayford. And in Florida, it had a nickname called The Rock. So when the committee called me and said, would you like to come to The Rock? Not high on my list. It was a tough spot to come through, but it's all part and parcel of who I am today. So let me just unpack things a little bit. I want to paint a picture with words so the newcomer can understand that I'm you. I am one of you. You are one of us. I want to tell you what happened because that's important. If it hasn't happened for you, I hope that you stay until the miracle does happen. And it's important for the old timer there in the group to hear us speak about what it's like today. It gives the newcomer hope. It gives the old timer some relevance that we're walking the same path. I believe that we are all message bearers. We have a message to bear. We have a message to bring. It's the message, not our message, not a message, but the message of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's our job as old timers to keep the integrity of this program. If you've been around for a while, maybe a couple of decades or more, you may see that it seems like our program and the message of Alcoholics is under attack. And so the integrity of the program is up to us, all of us. So let me share with you where I came from and where I'm at today. I have no reason to be an alcoholic, although both my parents were alcoholics. I was abused as a child in every way a child can be abused. By the time I was 11 years old and I took that first drink, I hurt inside. I was a raw nerve. I had been emotionally abused, sexually abused, physically abused, and I was a wreck. And I didn't realize how much pain I was in until the pain went away. And the way that pain went away is I stole an old Milwaukee beer out of the refrigerator. And one of the signs, Jeff Foxworthy, I love his little jokes, but you may be an alcoholic if your first drink was an old Milwaukee and you came back for more. That's me. That's me. So I loved it. I didn't really like the taste at first, but the warm feeling I got, the numb feeling that I would spend the next 20 years chasing, that numb feeling where nothing hurt. It wasn't that I started feeling more comfortable in my own skin. It wasn't that I felt important. It wasn't that I felt valuable. None of those things happened when I drank. I just didn't care. As soon as I got sober, as soon as I got dry, I felt those things again. I never fit in wherever I went. I was one child, middle child of 6. My dad was, he fathered the way he was taught to father. My mother mothered the best way she could as a practicing alcoholic and drug addict. My dad is still alive today. He's 90. He and I have a wonderful relationship, and it wasn't always that way. This program taught me how to do that. And so took that first drink. It wasn't too long after that I committed my first felony, 12 years old. I broke into a community center and I stole a 6-pack of Pabst Blue Ribbon. You can already see the downward spiral of my disease. Old Milwaukee, Pabst Blue Ribbon. I don't know how much lower you can go, maybe Mad Dog. But I broke into this community center and I had a co-defendant. He was a lookout. And so he waited outside, the coward that he was. And I went inside and I stole that 6-pack. It was warm. And we went and we hid in a ditch and we drank that 6-pack. Like any good alcoholic, I shared that 6-pack with my co-defendant. He got 1, I got 5. And it was off to the races. I don't get involved in whether I was born an alcoholic or I became an alcoholic or I evolved an alcoholic. It's really not important to me. What's important to me is I am an alcoholic, and now I need a solution. I wouldn't find that solution for many years. And the hurt that I had and the pain that I had inside turned into rage. I was a rage drinker. I was a blackout drinker from that first 6-pack. And I would continue that all the way through my teens, got arrested again. When I didn't get arrested for that first burglary, but they did come to the house. And I was scared, but I got out of it. And I felt maybe empowered. Never a good criminal. I was just a drunk. I was a thief. And when I was 17 years old, I was playing football. It's amazing, I could put on the football uniform, I could get on the field with all the other guys in the same uniform, and I still felt like I stuck out. I didn't fit in. So I was playing football and I got my aggression out. I just loved football. I wasn't really good at it, but I loved hitting people, so they put me on a defensive tackle position, and I just got to hit people. And never really excelled at it, but I enjoyed it. Got arrested for, they said, attempted murder. I pulled a armed weapon on somebody and chased him around the parking lot. I didn't try to kill him. I never pulled the trigger. But nevertheless, I was charged. I went to trial. It was a big deal. I grew up in St. Petersburg, Florida. And until the high school years, in the mid-'60s, and actually late 60s, we were having race riots, and kids were getting killed or beat up at least because of the color of their skin. And it became pretty rough, and we left. We went to Arkansas. And so I picked up a southern dialect that I can still revert to when I go visit my family there for a little bit. So I can fit in Georgia. I can fit in Georgia just fine. And so there I was in Arkansas, committed this felony. The whole senior class of my high school went to the trial. And I was found not guilty. And I was really empowered. I joined the Air Force. Even though I had a football scholarship to a small Arkansas college, I went into the Air Force. And I went into the Air Force because I just had to get out of Dodge, had to get out of town. My mom was promiscuous in the small community, and it was embarrassing. And I was ashamed. My family was poor. I had subsidized lunches. If you've ever been in school and you had that, I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. My dad was an auto mechanic, and he worked hard, but we were poor, and I was embarrassed and I was ashamed. You know, I spent a good portion of my life embarrassed and ashamed. And I was ashamed of the things that happened to me as a child. I was ashamed of a person that I had become. I was always trying to measure up, to be a little tougher than the next guy, because I didn't want them to find out that I wasn't. So I went in the Air Force. I had a guaranteed contract to become an air traffic controller. And I did become an air traffic controller. I did well in the service while I was under lock and key. We do that well. We can have a set of rules. Alcoholics can follow those rules. It's when we get let go and we get thinking and deciding for ourselves that this alcoholic gets in trouble. Went through basic, went through air traffic control school. There was 38 of us that walked into the FAA Academy. There were 6 of us that walked out. And one of the things they did for me is I had to lose my southern drawl. You don't talk on the radios in the Air Force with a southern drawl, and I didn't even know I had a southern drawl. So whoever it was gave me the tape recorder, sent me back to the barracks, and told me to lose the southern drawl. My response was, "What southern drawl?" And so I had to learn to speak. So I did that, and I was stationed. They sent me back to Florida. Imagine that. I joined to see the world, and I went back to Patrick Air Force Base in Satellite Beach. I was stationed there, became an air traffic controller. And if you remember, that's back in the early 80s when President Reagan was elected, and he fired all the air traffic controllers. And I was FA certified, and I didn't get to go anywhere, but the senior NCOs, they went and they filled the spots in the nation. And I was very proud to serve during that time because we kept the country going. And never came under fire, never went overseas, never was in combat. I did have to make coffee a few times and change that thermostat. It got a little warm in there sometimes. But the chair force was good to me, but I wasn't good to it. And I got in trouble again because I never stopped drinking. I kept drinking. Has anybody ever been kicked out of a Denny's restaurant in here? All right. Very good. I'm in the right place then. I haven't met too many people that got kicked out of a Denny's, but I did. I was in a blackout, and I went in, thankfully not in uniform, but I went into the restroom, and I used the urinal. That's what we do, right? I guess I went into the wrong restroom, and the women's bathrooms, they don't have urinals. I guess it was a sink. So they didn't much care for that. And so I was asked not to come back. Didn't know it until the next time I went to stop in there. But off duty, I was a wreck. On duty, I loved the Air Force. I loved being an airman. I loved the little ribbons on my chest that I was acquiring. And I wanted to make it my life. I wanted to make it a career. My aptitude showed that I would be a good fighter pilot. I don't know really why. Maybe we're risk takers. Still a risk taker. I married a redheaded Jersey girl. So I still stare death in the face every once in a while. But about 3.5 years into my enlistment, I got in trouble again, and I got arrested, and I was in a county jail, and I didn't think that they could touch me because I had been untouchable before. But they had the evidence. They had my confession that I gave them when I was drunk. And I got convicted for felony assault. Because I admitted guilt, the Air Force was not amenable to allowing me to stay in, and they asked me to leave. Because I had a good record, I got an honorable discharge. And I kept my benefits. Not really sure how that happened, except now looking back, I know that was God's hand in that situation. And the only thing I couldn't do was re-enlist. And so here I am, an air traffic controller. In just a period of a few weeks, I went from an air traffic controller to a pest controller. Now, if there's any pest controllers in the room, that's a great job and so forth. But as a 20-year-old young man, that was a huge blow to my ego. And I remember all I had to do was stay out of trouble. For 2.5 years, I could get off of probation, and I could go to work for the FAA. Now, step 11 says that we're supposed to pray and meditate, improve our conscious contact with God. If you're not a praying person, and if you're flying home today, remember that there are people behind those microphones in the air traffic control centers and towers just like me. Raging alcoholics. I never showed up drunk, but my life was unmanageable. And so sometimes your life is in hands of people you just don't know. How about Dr. Bob? He was a surgeon. If you needed that kind of surgery, it might have been a problem. Anyway, would have been a real pain in the butt, right? So, I couldn't do it, guys. I couldn't stay out of trouble. I kept drinking and I kept getting in trouble. For 2.5 years, I was a thief. And almost every house that I went to, I had this batch of keys. I traveled around town in St. Petersburg, Clearwater, Largo, and I was stealing people's booze. I was stealing their dry goods. I was stealing their cash. I was eating out of their refrigerators. When I speak in that area of the world, I have to make an invitation for amends, because if there's someone that I stole from that I don't know, and I don't know who I stole from because I stole so much for 2.5 years until I got caught red-handed. And the investigator told me, look, we now see your route book. We see these reported burglaries. We see that you've been a thief for a long time. We can put you away forever. Or you can just sign this plea agreement, take a 7-year bid, go down the road. And I did. Before that plea, they let me out on bond. I was on probation, kind of unusual, but you know what? I'm a master manipulator. I was. I'm an honest man today. But I manipulated the system. I lied to my probation officer, and I got out on bond. While I was out on bond the night before my sentencing for the probation violation, thought it was a good idea to have a party. I blacked out again. I remember crawling into my home through the bedroom window. Kind of thought that was odd, but I didn't. And I undressed and I laid down in my bed in my underwear, and I heard people talking in my home, in my apartment. I got up, I armed myself with a little steak knife, and I chased these people out of the house. And there I came out of my little haze, my little blackout. I'm standing in a parking lot in my white underwear and black socks in an apartment complex that I didn't live in a parking lot that I didn't belong in. I was in those people's house. They call that midnight armed burglary. And so they sent me away. That was the first time in prison. My mother had committed suicide in her addiction. I don't know that she intended to. I think she was just a plea for help. And I like to pause here in my story because I hear it said, and I don't mean to be step on anyone's toes, but the way I see it, it's the brave people who stick around. It's the brave people who get up another day. When it seems impossible to keep going, they get up and they go. When all the cards are stacked against them, they keep marching and they don't cash out. I think suicide is an act of mental illness and an act of desperation and perhaps an act of selfishness. But as a 21-year-old man, 21-year-old boy, I read a letter that my mother wrote, and she blamed me for her suicide. I know today that's not my fault. But at 21 years old, I wore that, and I was ashamed. I lost myself in a bottle and I woke up in a state penitentiary. Now picture this, I was, 22 years old, just turning 23. I show up in a southern Florida prison. I had blonde hair back then, blue eyes, and thought I was a badass. I wasn't. And I had to fight. I was not going to get raped. I didn't, but I fought. I fought a lot. And that's when I was at Rayford and at the Rock. They had this old air whistle that blew every night at midnight. If you didn't know you were in prison and you heard that air whistle blew, you knew you were in prison. It was a terrible, terrible, ugly place. And usually back then, a 7-year sentence, you would do about 24 months with good behavior, you'd get out. I did 4.5 years because I couldn't stay out of trouble, because I was going to fight at any provocation. I was going to fight because I didn't want to be seen as weak. I was trying to prove myself. I thought respect was fear. I was never a good fighter. I was pretty enthusiastic, but I was never really good. And I probably got whooped more times than I whooped. But I was willing, and that's what separates the victims or the prey from the predators in there, I guess. So I got out of prison in 1987, and I knew one thing for sure. I never wanted to go back. Didn't occur to me that I needed to stop drinking. See, I don't see the word denial in 164 pages of my big book. I do see the word delusion. The word delusion is a little bit different than denial. Denial would be I'm fully aware that I'm wearing a red tie, and I would say that I'm not wearing a red tie. Delusional would be thinking I'm not wearing a red tie, even though I am wearing a red tie. I was in delusion. I didn't know I was an alcoholic. I just thought I needed to control my drinking, so I went about trying to control my drinking. I also went to college. I was a straight A student in college. Phi Beta Kappa, didn't even know what that meant until they came and asked me to join. It's an honor business society in the prison system, the college system. And a bunch of pencil-neck geeks that I didn't belong in. But I went to business management, marketing minor, and I loved to be educated. I loved the school, but it started getting in the way in something I loved more. That was drinking, womanizing, partying. My education got pushed to the side because my true love, drinking and partying and womanizing, was monopolizing my life. I had gone up the ranks into a company, a trucking firm, and I was now an assistant manager, and there was about 50 guys that worked under me. And at work, I did pretty good. In my personal life, just like in the military, I was chaotic and out of control, unmanageable. It's 4 years and 10 months after I got out of prison, and that's significant because in Florida, if you get in trouble within 5 years of your getting out of prison for a violent offense, they can deem you to be a habitual violent felony offender. If you meet the criteria, I did. I came out of a blackout in a holding cell, and I didn't know why I was there. I could have killed somebody. Thank God I didn't. But I apparently tried to steal some dry goods out of a barmaid's car. I've never done this particular dry good. My drug of choice is alcohol. I am an alcoholic. And so I had also been very cooperative with the police. Gave a full confession that I don't remember. So I made the case easy for him. And the state decided that I was a drunk and I needed to go to treatment. And they wanted me to go to an 18-month treatment program, and I was not happy about that. 18 months? Are you kidding me? I'd rather go to 18 minutes. We can go over the material, and I'll head about my business. But so I signed a plea agreement. I pled guilty, signed a plea agreement, was set for sentencing. This is where things went a little sideways, and I used to say that I was supposed to go to that treatment facility. I was not supposed to go to prison. I know now that God had a plan, and I didn't much care for the plan, but the plan is exactly what I needed. You see, there was a crooked judge. Most judges are not crooked. This one was. And he asked my dad for $5,000 in order to send me to this treatment program. My dad was highly offended. He's an honest man. And he told the judge so and did not give him that money. Now, I didn't know about that for 10 years, about 10 years while I was in prison. But I showed up at sentencing, and I'll never forget that day. It's one of those days that's frozen in time. You have those times in your life, I'm sure. And I stood before that judge, and he said, well, I'm going to determine that this man is a career criminal. I didn't see that in the plea agreement. He said, and I'm going to sentence him to prison. I didn't see that in the plea agreement. The state attorney was just as surprised as I was. And they said, well, if you're going to do all that, well, we'd suggest a maximum of 20 years in prison. I was aghast. 20 years in prison? Are you kidding me? I didn't hurt anybody, but I did scare somebody. And I scared a lot of people. And society needed to be protected from me. I can't blame anybody but me for going to prison. I was knocking on prison's door and they just opened. Well, long story short, that judge sentenced me to 70 years in prison. And that time, those words are frozen in the memory of that time. He suspended 35 years, which means that that's going to be held over your head. You're going to go to prison for 35 years. And as long as you conduct yourself properly, you don't get in any trouble, we'll release you and you can serve the rest of your life on parole, probation, whatever you want to call it, as a career criminal. So they moved me away. I went to prison and I was back. I was back in familiar territory. And I had been going. Prior to sentencing, I was ordered to go to AA meetings. If you need to have a paper signed, I love signing those papers. Love signing those papers. You see, I was not a qualified member of Alcoholics Anonymous when I came here because I did not have a desire to stop drinking. That's the only requirement for membership, by the way, right? So I didn't want to stop drinking. I just wanted to stop getting arrested. I also wanted to keep the girl, keep the job. Well, they sent me to prison. I lost a girl and I lost a job, so it wasn't working out real well for me in Alcoholics Anonymous. But during that 6-month period, 5.5, 6 months period while I was on bond, I saw something in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that I wanted. Couldn't really put my finger on it, but I saw people that were comfortable in their own skin. I saw people that had a light in them that I couldn't really define. I saw peace behind their eyes. The only time that I felt that kind of peace is when I was drunk or on my way to a good buzz. And I wanted that. I figured that I would die in prison because I've been in prison before and there's no way you can do clean time in prison and be a man. And so I resigned myself to spending the rest of my life in prison. But if I was going to spend the rest of my life in prison, I wanted that thing I saw in those people's lives and their spirit and their eyes that I saw in AA, so I got a sponsor. And I started working the steps for the first time. It took about 18 months in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous for me to have a spiritual experience as a result of these steps. I tell you, I believe that it is a guarantee that if you work the steps the way the big book tells you to work the steps, you thoroughly follow this path, you will have a spiritual experience. It may not be the same type. It may be a learning type. It may be a growth type. It may be a bang type like I did, but you're going to have a spiritual experience sufficient enough to bring about a psychic personality change. When that happens, you're not going to be the same man that walked in these rooms. When that happened to me, let me tell you, set the stage. This is a part of the story about what happened. All this is what it was like. The prison sentences, a crooked judge, all that pain and suffering was what it was like. What happened was, in prison, I got a sponsor. And against my will, I had a spiritual experience I wasn't looking for, didn't think I wanted. The way I saw it in that prison environment is with the guys that went to the chapel were weak. They were hiding behind the Bible. There were people that prison has a class of prisoners. And I'll just speak real to you guys because this is a guys' meeting. We can do that. The sex offenders and child molesters are on the bottom of the food chain. And those are the people that I saw going to the chapel. The bank robbers and the murderers, they're on the top. The burglars and the thieves, they're somewhere in the middle. That's where I fit in. Well, I wanted to be that guy. So I was involved in all kinds of criminality. I was paying officers to bring in stuff, dope. I was paying the dope boys to sell. I was making money off of that. I was loan sharking, all kinds of criminal behavior. They put me in confinement, in isolation. It's a prison within the prison, right? I'm in there in January of 1993. And that's when, against my will, I had a spiritual experience. I remember getting on my knees and praying that third step prayer all by myself, and I gave myself to God. And I said, I don't know what you have for me or what you want to do with me, but here I am. And so something miraculous happened in that cell. It was as if I was no longer alone, didn't see any flashing lights or see any presence, but I felt different. I felt like someone had poured warm syrup over me. And it's like I felt different. I came out of that cell block, out of confinement. One of the things that occurred to me when I was back there, I said, here I am in a maximum security prison. I've been kicked out of the Air Force, a career of my dreams, because I couldn't fit in. I was kicked out of society and sent to prison because I couldn't fit in. Now that I'm in the prison community, I'm deemed too dangerous to security of the prison to be an open population. They put me in isolation. That's how far down I had to go. I had been to a mental hospital for detox, Baker acted. I had been to prison and jails. The only place I had left to go was a cemetery. And only by the grace of God did I not go there. Because if I had continued in my path, it was just a matter of time before I caught the end of a blade. Somehow got shot off the fence. But I had that spiritual experience. Before having the spiritual experience, I put a tattoo on my arm, an arm reaching through the razor wire with a justice scale and a lightning bolt. On the bottom it said justice. It was my plan to get out and kill that judge. It's what I thought about every night I laid down to go to bed, just keeping it real. All the ways I could do it. I was a sharpshooter. I could shoot pretty good back then. I laughed when I saw your t-shirt. It's protected by Smith & Wesson. I can't wear that where I live. I'm not supposed to have guns. If a cop sees me wearing that shirt, he might just pull me over. But so I came out of that cell. I knew I had to change the tattoo. I knew I had changed from the inside out. I was no longer willing to hurt another person. The things that I was doing, I could no longer do. There were people that were upset about that. The guards that were making money off me, they weren't making money off me anymore. The gangs that I affiliated with, I was never in a gang, but I did business with them. They weren't happy. But there was an understanding chaplain there who was familiar with the 12 Steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. He invited me to come to church. Wasn't too thrilled about that for the reasons that I explained. A bank robber who was high on the hierarchy of prisoners, who's also in the program, he said, you know what, if the God that you know was willing to die for those guys, do you think you can go and sit on the pew with them? And so I went. And I started learning about God. When I got here, I didn't want to hear about God. I was angry at God. I was agnostic. I didn't know if he existed, and if he did, I didn't want nothing to do with him because he didn't want nothing to do with me. When God was mentioned in the meeting, I got angry. And if you're a newcomer and that gets to you, I beg you to stay. Just stay until the miracle happens, because that can change. Your concept of God may be different than my concept of God, but the big book says very clearly there is only one God. May you find him now. So I started learning about God. My journey through the spiritual development of this program included coming in kicking and screaming against my will. In time, thoroughly embracing. My first prayer was, God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me. And it was incredible, man. I encourage you to say that prayer. If you're wondering about your faith, if you're still growing in your faith, if you're not sure about the God angle of this program, I will tell you that God is mentioned 281 times in 164 pages of our material in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a pivotal point of our program. on page 45 says the primary purpose of this program is to introduce you to a relationship with a higher power. Therefore, out of necessity, we're going to have to speak about God. If God chases you out of here, alcohol will chase you back in. So I hope that you'll just stay. Be uncomfortable. That's where I've grown the most, is when I've been uncomfortable. So I ended up going to Bible college. I don't know why, except I was just drawn into that. I got a theology degree. I became a law clerk and got a paralegal degree. I wanted to learn. I wanted to change. They told me I needed to be of service to other people, so I started helping people with their law cases. I got good at it. It's where God had planted me. I got hundreds of people out of prison. That doesn't make the prison guards all that happy. And so I was threatened. I was locked up. One time it was arranged for me to be beaten because I had helped somebody with their legal work. What had happened was I was working in the county jail and went back 6 times to the county jail trying to get a new trial, new sentencing. One of these times I was working in a law library and I helped a young black kid. He didn't have an education, fix a score sheet. And in the Florida prison system, I don't know how it is in Georgia, but you get a score sheet like if you're playing golf. And at the end of the day, you want to have a low score, just like golf. If you have a high score, that'll equate how much time you're going to go to prison. They had messed up his score sheet. I fixed it. He went to court the next day. He went before my judge. The judge who hated me by now because I had filed so many writs against him, so many legal pleadings against him and trying to get this thing reversed. I didn't know about the bribe yet. So the kid went before the judge. He was 19 years old, if I remember correctly, had a 7th grade education. He said, "Judge, I have a corrected score sheet." He showed it to him. The state attorney agreed. Yeah, he's right. The judge asked him, "Son, you're absolutely right. We're going to take 9 years off your sentence, but we're just curious how you figured this out because you don't have an education. We know that." And he mentioned me, my name, and I can picture the judge's face just turning beet red. That night, I found myself in another isolation cell, another confinement cell. I didn't know why I was there. That night, a young guy came in. His name was Robert. Robert had been beaten up. Loose teeth, broken lip, broken nose, black eye. I cleaned him up best I could. I introduced him to this way of life. He accepted it. We said the 3rd step prayer together that night. He went off to prison the next day. I thought maybe that's why I was there. What had happened to Robert was he stole food off of the officer's cart. They threw him in a cell. And I'll tell you that there's a lot of racial groups in prison. I'm not a racist, never was. I'm grateful that Alcoholics Anonymous is not. But in prison, it's not that way. And these guys were 5%ers. And they hated anyone that didn't look like them, and I didn't look like them. Robert didn't look like them. So if the guards were unhappy with you, they'd put you in the 5%er cell. They had to segregate them because they couldn't put other inmates that didn't look like them in those cells. The reason that they put Robert in that cell was to be beaten. And they give the 5%ers extra rations in order to beat the inmates they want beaten. So they came to me the next morning, 3 or 4 officers, and said, "We have to put you down in a 5%er cell." Now, by that time, God had revealed himself to me in a very powerful way. I had been through riots in prison, walked across prison yards that were, the National Guard were surrounding the prison with M16s. They were getting ready to shoot inside the prisons. If you're not scared in that kind of environment, you're just not sane. And I was untouched. Can't explain that, except that God protected me in those situations. There were incidences where one time I was walking back from a store. They have little canteens. I had arms full of groceries. Remember, this is during a period of time I was praying, "God, if you're real, reveal yourself to me." I was surrounded by 4 or 5 young black kids, and they were going to take all my groceries. I couldn't stop them from taking my groceries. There was 4 or 5 of them. But I heard myself say, "Well, okay, that's fine. Let me go put my boots on. I'll come back and we can get down." And they said, "Okay." They opened up and I walked right through them. Couldn't figure that out, except by the grace of God. I went into the dorm, put my groceries away, put my boots on. Old ex-con from from San Quentin came up, name was Spider. He was a boxer, a tough guy. He said, "You going back out?" And I said, "I have to go back out. You don't not answer a call out in prison." See, I don't believe being a godly man calls us to be a coward. I believe it calls us to be meek. Not weak, meek. Meekness to me is a definition of quiet, controlled strength. So I went out, told Spider I was going out. And he said, "Give me 5 minutes." I said, "I don't want a weapon." You see, I'd had a spiritual experience. I had made a dedication to God that I would no longer be violent. I wouldn't hurt another human being unless I had to defend myself. I told him that. He said, "I'm not going to get you a weapon. Just give me 5 minutes." You see, I had been walking in that prison as an alcoholic in recovery for a period of years. Been going to meetings, working the steps, being sponsoring other men. People saw that. I want you to know that people in your life, I was talking to a brother before I came in, you may be the only big book someone's ever read. This is a program of attraction. You are a message bearer. Whether you like it or not, or whether you want it or not, people are looking at you and they're being either attracted or repelled by what they see in you regarding Alcoholics Anonymous and recovery. Kind of draws us into a new level of behavior, doesn't it? Well, long story short, apparently people have been watching what I was doing, and it really doesn't reflect on me nearly as much as it reflects on the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and what a relationship with God can do. When I got up to go outside, by this time, those 4 or 5 young blacks had turned into 30. And there was fixing to be a riot. When I stood up, 20 other men of every color stood up with me. And we walked outside. They were all behind me. And I'm praying the 3rd step prayer. God, remove this difficulty from me so I can bear witness to those I would help of your power, your love, and your way of life. That's what I get to do today. Because when we walked outside, the head idiot in charge of their group and the head idiot in charge of this group, which was me, squared off. And he said, why are all those people there? And I said, all these people are here to keep all your guys off of me. This is between you and I. If you want to get down, we can get down. But I hope that you don't, because I don't want to hurt you, and I don't want to be hurt. I saw something happen that I never expected. That young man, I saw his whole countenance changed, and he became a little boy and scared, and he ran, and he checked in, is what they call it. He went to protective custody. When that happens, you have to give a name, so I figured he'd give my name. I went back to the dorm. I expected to get locked up. They didn't lock me up. I found out later that he told the officers my name, and the officer said, "No, that guy wasn't causing a problem. You were causing a problem." And didn't come lock me up. And it's because of the reputation I formed because I was a practicing member of Alcoholics Anonymous. So fast forward now, I'm standing at this door in a prison, in a jail, in confinement, big metal door, a big bar that goes across it. The officers are there. They have their black gloves on. They gave me the choice. Either go down to the 5% cell voluntarily, or we're going to take you down there by cell extraction. If there's ever been, has there anyone ever been a recipient of a cell extraction here? I see a hand. And I see another hand. This is not a picnic, guys. They're coming in and basically they're going to whoop your butt and they're going to pull you out of that cell. So my choice was 1 butt whooping or 2. I'm not a PhD, but I'm smart enough to know that if I'm given a choice between 1 or 2 butt whooping, I'm picking 1 every time. So I packed up my stuff. I'm saying the 3rd step prayer, the serenity prayer, and I'm walking down that catwalk in that cell block to that 5% cell. They opened up the cell. It's an 8 by 12. There's 3 of them in there waiting for me. I set my bedroll down, and I'm thinking, okay, God, I told you that I would not be violent anymore. This is going to be tough. I got to protect myself. So I'm asking you to change the situation, and if I have to be violent, I pray that I won't hurt anybody seriously. I won't get hurt seriously. Saying these things in my mind. The big guy who's sitting on a bunk, exposing his left temple and jawbone to me, which was where I had to hit, right? That's where I had to strike first. The big guy, hopefully get a knockout blow. He's putting on his shoes to get ready to whoop me. And he called me by a racial name, and he said, "Why'd they put you in here?" And I said, "I don't know, I'm a law clerk." He stopped midway tying his shoe, and he looked up at me, called me by another racial name, but it was a little more friendly of a racial name this time. He said, "Are you such and such law clerk back from prison, working the midnight to 4 a.m. shift?" I said, "Yeah." Now, why was I working in a law library where I didn't have to work at that ungodly hour of midnight to 4 a.m.? It's because we at Alcoholics Anonymous are men of service, right? Like the two guys that just were asked to serve in this meeting that weren't prepared to serve. They just got up without hesitation, they served. That's what we do. Wherever you go, be of service. It can be a small thing, putting a shopping cart up. It can be opening a door for somebody. It can be a kind smile at an AA meeting to a newcomer. It can be a little thing. And it was a little thing for me to fix that score sheet on that young 19-year-old kid's score sheet when I was working in a law library. When I told the guy that was me, he looked at me and he said, "You got 9 years off my nephew's case." Now think about that. I'm in a jail with 1,600 other men. I help someone that I don't know, and the next day I'm being thrown in a cell with 3 men that I don't know, and they're related. The officers had told me they'd be back in 20 minutes to take me to the infirmary to get me fixed up. So it's no mystery what I was going in there for, right? When they came back, those 3 5%ers and I, who didn't look like them, were playing cards. The officers got mad and took our cards. I had a backup deck, and we continued to play cards. And they shared their extra rations with me. It was pretty cool. See, the God that I come to know will make your enemies lay down with you. They'll put you at peace. Went to a new prison not too long after that, got this tattoo changed. The tattoo that swore vengeance on a judge that I was going to kill. I wasn't going to kill him anymore because my sponsor had said you have to forgive him. See, I drop some F-bombs from time to time. Hope you'll forgive me. My F-bombs may sound a little bit different. One of my F-bombs is forgiveness. One of my F-bombs is faith. Another one of my F-bombs is fellowship and fun. See, I believe all those things are crucial to my recovery today. If we were a glum lot, if we didn't have a good time, who would want that? Who would be attracted to that? Well, I had developed faith, and I put a single word on the top of this tattoo that said God's justice. See, God's the one that works it all out in the end, not me. There's nothing for free. All the bad things I've done, I've paid for or been forgiven for. So I got transferred to a new prison, another place where God just showed up. This big mountain of a man. I mean, he had to be 350 pounds, 6'9". I don't know. That's the way I remember him. His name was Big Jack. He was big. And he had this thing about raping white boys. Now, I was 250, 260 pounds. I lived on the weight pile. I had 20-inch arms. I loved lifting weights and working out. So I wasn't a little guy, but I was a new guy in the compound, so he tried me. Told me I had to go to the canteen and get him some groceries. And I was like, darn. But I was armed with the third step prayer I committed to memory. I suggest you do that. Because when life gets tough, and it will, that third step prayer will empower you to walk through it with dignity and grace. So will the serenity prayer. So I prayed. They went to chow hall. I went to the canteen, just like he told me to. I bought the same food he wanted, and I ate it. I went back to my cell. I bought 6 number 2 pencils. Some of you know what number 2 pencils can do. Good weapons. You can take them anywhere in prison. So I had them all over my cell. And I'm sitting there and I'm praying, God, I pray that you'll just turn this thing around. I don't want to hurt this guy, and I'm not going to let him hurt me the best I can. But I need you to turn this around. I don't know what happened between the time that they went to chow and when they came back. I'll never know. But when he came back, I was no longer being called a racial name. Now it was Mr. and an apology. He wouldn't get any closer to me than you guys in the middle row. And he was yelling across the cell block in one of the worst maximum security prisons in the state of Florida. And he was saying, I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were. And I thought to myself, me neither. Who am I? I don't know to this day, except that's an answer to prayer. There's just so many times that God will reveal himself to you in such a powerful, tangible way before your faith is increased and you can walk through just about anything with dignity and grace. So I travel along this prison system 20 years after my spiritual experience. I'm getting ready to get out. And there's not too many employment opportunities available for a career criminal, habitual violent felony offender who spent 27 years in a penitentiary in Florida. I pictured myself in the business end of a shovel, pushing a lawnmower. Nothing wrong with those trades. I was getting out of prison 53 years old. And all of a sudden I started getting visits from law firms. And they were offering me jobs. Folks, that does not happen. It's impossible. Me standing here before you today is impossible, except by the grace of God. So I was offered jobs for law firms. One of them, actually, I didn't know which one to take. And so I told God that I'm not real smart here. So can you tell me which one to take? What's your will in this situation? Because I really seek after God's will. And I think that's the perfect and safest place for us to be. And so the next week I get a letter from one of the law firms. Oh, by the way, we own a house in Riverview, Florida that we'd like to rent to you. You can live in. Now, if I go fill out an application to live in an apartment complex, it's not going to be received very well. I got 4 burglaries, 1 aggravated assault, 1 midnight burglary armed. So I came out of a 2-man cell into a 3-bedroom lakefront home, paid for by my new job. That's impossible. So I started working for that company. She was just absolutely crazy. I stayed there for about 8 months. And I'll tell you that I was married while I was in prison. I'll qualify that it was not another prisoner. A lady that I knew, good friends with her late husband, passed away, and I was there for her, helped her financially. We ended up falling in love and getting married. She was not in a program, was not on a spiritual path. And I'll tell you that sometimes bad things happen. Life happens in recovery. I was 22 years sober when she left me. I wanted to go to counseling. I was going to counseling. She went once, didn't hear what she wanted to hear, thought I was broken, told me I was broken all the time, did not want me to come to AA, did not want me to participate in this fellowship. Called me all kinds of names, verbally abusive, just like when I was a kid. I don't know how that all happens, huh? My sponsor said, you keep your mouth to yourself. You keep your side of the street clean. 5 years from now, I want you to be able to look back at that and know you did the right thing. And I did that. One time I let a word slip and I had to make immediate amends. Just like in prison. One time I had made a commitment to God that I wouldn't be violent, and this guy got in my face and I headbutted him. I'd like to say it was kind of a light headbutt, but it was a headbutt. And I had immediately, it hurt me more than it hurt him, I think. I made immediate amends to them in public in the prison, and I told him, I'm so sorry I did that. That's not who I am. Now, in the prison code, he deserved it and more. He was a snitch, and he was trying to get me in trouble. but there's no excuse for me to revert back to the old ways. So I got divorced. I was a year out of prison. And I remember sitting back on the back of my yard, looking out over the lake as the sun set after the day she left. She emptied out the bank account. She took a lot of the furniture. I'm not blaming her. We were on a different path. We both had a part. But I thought that I should feel terrible. I thought I should feel defeated. I thought I should feel ruined. I thought I should feel lonely. But the faith that had been developed through walking the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous and developing my faith on the 11th step, I had a companion right there with me, just like in that 5%er cell, just like in those riots, just like with Big Jack. God was with me, and I felt peaceful. Kind of a peace that defies understanding. So I went about my business. I opened up a company called Prisoner Connections. This business was given to me when I was newly after I had a spiritual awakening. This idea was given, even the name. I wanted to connect prisoners to good attorneys that could help them without fleecing their family financially. And I formed that company. I met good attorneys. And I did that goal. And the business has been wildly successful. And I, at one point, employed 20 people. We're down to half that now. There's kind of a sweet spot. It's working out well. A man that walks out of prison, a pauper, in 11 years, is a CEO of a company that's worth millions. That's impossible, except by the grace of God. So I figured I'd be alone for the rest of my life because I didn't know, I know my picker's broke, right? You put me in a room. I was talking to my friend John I met this weekend, and you put him and I in a room of 100 people. We'll probably pick 100 women. We'll probably pick the same woman, the most craziest woman in the room. And we'll have a blast until we don't. And so I resigned myself to sit on my hands, and I'm not looking. I wasn't interested. I was focused on my business, focused on my sobriety, focused on my sponsorship. It was a new world to me. I went to prison when there was no internet, no cell phones. It was a whole new world to me. And I was excited, and I was happy, and I was joyous, and I was free. I'll tell you, when they came to get me out of that confinement cell back in 1993, you have to put your hands through what they call a beanhole, a little opening in the door, and they put handcuffs on you. From that day forward, I remember once I had handcuffs on my wrists, I had shackles on my ankles, I had a belly chain that connected the two. And they draw it tight. Sometimes they'll even put them over your shoulders and pull you down. No matter what they did to this body, I was free. I wrote my story, they published it in the Grapevine. I think it was 2015, Free on the Inside, Learning to Live Free, whatever the title it was, I forget. I didn't come up with it. But I was free on the inside a long time before they released me from prison. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous will do for each one of us. So, I told you about the judge, the end of the story with the judge. Now I'm in the legal profession. I own a legal consulting and paralegal firm. They changed the law for juveniles. I go to a juvenile law seminar, and guess who's there? I had prayed after I forgave him. I read a story in the big book called, it was about 3 nephews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They got thrown into a furnace. They got the death penalty because they were uncompromisingly spiritual men. And it became illegal to be spiritual men. And because they refused to compromise, they were thrown in that furnace. While in the furnace, the king who threw him in there looked in, and he threw 3 in, but there's 4 walking around. And of course, the 4th was God. And he called them out. And he asked them, who was that 4th? And they said, that was our God. And they didn't even smell a smoke. I knew God had been walking with me through prison. I knew that I was never alone ever since that spiritual experience. And so I knew, I love the part about the story about he didn't smell the smoke. I started praying that I wouldn't smell of prison when I walked out. So when I saw that judge, I'm dressed similar to what I'm dressed now. Might have been the same blazer. I walked up to him and I shook his hand and I said, Judge, called him by name, 22 years ago, 23 years ago, whatever it was back then, you presided over my case and you sent me to AA. And I'm still sober today. He got a big smile on his face. See, my dad was going in for heart surgery, quadruple bypass. And before he went under the knife, he told me the rest of the story. I had forgiven the judge up until that point. And I don't know if you've ever experienced renewed resentments. I had to start praying all over again. The big book tells us how to do that. You don't pray that they get stomach cancer or get hit by a bus. You pray that they would be blessed with every material, worldly blessing you've ever wanted. And so I started praying. Remember the first time I did that, I had to get on my knees next to my bunk in a prison dorm, 72 other guys. I was so afraid that they would see me as weak, that I would become prey, and I'd have to hurt somebody or get hurt. I got on my knees and prayed anyway because I was willing to go to any length to recover. And so the guys that I was most afraid of, the gangbangers, the predators, they came up to me and they started asking me to pray for them, pray for their mothers. Amazing, amazing. Also, as I'm shaking the judge's hand, we're still holding hands shaking, and I said, Judge, you also sent me to prison for a very long time. He could not get rid of my hand fast enough. And I told him, and I thank you for that as well, because God used that to bring me to where I'm at today. And where I'm at today is amazing. Who I am today is amazing because of who I was before. And he was walking away by that point. But I was free. I was totally free. So I'm on probation, supposed to be on probation for 35 years, right? God had another plan. 7 years I was on probation. They were asking me to talk to other probationees and share with them this way of life. Take them to meetings. Go help them move and introduce myself. And I'm being a service wherever I can be a service. After 7 years, I remember it was during COVID, and we were having Zoom court from my living room. My sponsor was there, my pastor was there, my wife was there. Other friends were there, fellowship friends. The judge said things out of her mouth, different judge, I never thought I would hear said about me. You're a model citizen. You were completely rehabilitated. I was told I was incorrigible. I would never be free again. She said, I wish I could record the conversation she had with my probation officer because she'd like to play that for other probationees that are coming into the system. I don't take credit for that. I'll gladly take credit for all the things that I've done, the terrible things I've done in my life. I want to give God credit for all the good things that have happened because of my spiritual change through this program. I want to give AA credit for giving me an avenue to be in a relationship with God. Somebody mentioned it earlier. I'm following some giants of this program in faith, and Chuck and Chip. They were awesome. If you want to look at a real hero, Chip was very kind in saying that I risked a lot to come up here because of the hurricane and the gas and all that kind of stuff. I jumped in a little red Corvette and I drove up the highway. I worried if I was going to get gas or stay in a hotel. That's not a big sacrifice. I got a question to ask each of you. If you had a prognosis and a man told you might not live for another 2 to 5 years, would you be here? Chip is. When the rubber hits the road, and it will, I hope that you've developed the kind of program, the kind of faith, the kind of relationship with God that will get you through any of life's problems, because the big book says a relationship with God will solve all your problems. That's amazing. That's a promise. That's a guarantee. So they let me off of probation. I'm a free man. I got a passport. I'm going to Caribbean later this month to speak on a cruise ship. I don't know how many drunks I'm going to ruin their buzz, but I'm going to try. I'm going to try. My wife is speaking too. And so we're going to have a blast. It's fun in recovery. So in 2019, I'm out riding a mountain bike. I gave up my motorcycle because they were just killing too many people in Florida. So I had a heart attack. I was a marathoner. I was riding mountain bikes all the time. And I couldn't catch my breath. My wife was having a sponsee get-together at the house. And so I couldn't go there. So I decided in the midst of not being able to catch my breath, having a tightness in my chest, I went to Wendy's, got a couple cheeseburgers and a Frosty. I'm living proof that God protects the ignorant. I lived through the night somehow. I went to a meeting the next day and turned white as a sheet. Could hardly stand up for the Lord's Prayer. I remember being in that meeting. It was a great meeting about faith. I didn't want to interrupt the meeting. I wonder if Sandy Beach felt the same way. He died in a meeting, a massive heart attack. I was thinking that as I was sitting there. I said, what better place for me to pass? I went to the hospital. I was completely clogged on one side. They put a stent in, kept me alive for 3 months, and did a quadruple bypass. They almost lost me. And I was more scared for TJ through that whole situation than I was for myself. But that's a big deal. I'm part of the Zipper Club. And so I was on blood thinner because of the stent, and they forgot about that, I guess, at the VA. I bled out. My hemoglobin's supposed to be about 13 point something. It was 5 point something. And my blood pressure was just uncontrollable. My heart rate was an AFib. They were losing me. They were getting a crash cart. They got her out. I was semi-conscious. I remember that all happening. Guess what I felt? Peace. When I was a kid, I suffocated. I remember dying. I remember going up someplace. I was just a young kid. I knew wherever that was, where that light was at, I wanted to be. I've always believed that there's a life after this life. But I never really understood what that was until I got a relationship with God. When I was laying on that gurney and they're running around, somebody identified I didn't have any blood in my veins, so they got some blood and they started putting it into me and they were trying to save me. I remember just talking to God like you and I are talking right now. Well, you're not talking too much. But kind of the same way in prayer. And I was saying, God, I guess this is my time. If it is, I'm committing myself to your care, but please take care of TJ. Make sure she's okay. It occurs to me, before sobriety, life was all about me. It occurs to me today that not so much. Even this story is not so much about me. It's about God in this program and the newcomer and those of us who are walking this path. Well, surprise, I survived. And I've been fully restored. I'm back to mountain biking and running and all the crazy things we do. Feel great. TJ and I are happy. We live in the middle of this program. What it's like today for us is we're active sponsors. We have sponsor families. Once a month, we have all our sponsees and their sponsees and their sponsees and their sponsees at our home. We separate the boys from the girls. I do my guys' thing. They do their girls' thing. And we have, in our case, we have monthly commitments that we have to keep because we want to be men of integrity, men of our word, men of honor, right? We have to read a book. We have to do some reading in the big book. We all do the same thing. We get together and share about it. If you don't do your commitment, I have a bag of rubber roaches that I hand out. A roach doesn't have any integrity or honor. And it's a funny reminder. You get to carry a roach in your pocket to remind you failed in your commitment. You failed in meeting that mark that we're trying to meet, to be men of integrity and honor. Do what you say what you do. We also do a random act of kindness every month for someone, and we try to be anonymous. Make the world a little better places wherever we go. If each one of us make a commitment this week to do a random act of kindness someplace, wherever we're at, and then just imagine what we can do. I want to close in this way. I believe that we all are warriors. I believe men are designed by the designer. Big Book calls him our creator, to be fighters, to be warriors. You are message bearers. Message bearers don't carry their own message. They carry the message that was given to them. The message that we have been given is a message of Alcoholics Anonymous. We have no right to change that message. We have no right to put a spin on that message. We can't change the words, those black words on the white pages, if we're message bearers. And so I charge you, and I charge myself, do the very best you can under the power of God to carry the message of Alcoholics Anonymous wherever you go, not only in word, but in deed, because people are watching you. I had a man walk up to me in prison, and he said, I've been watching you for 3 years. Oh my God, what have I done in 3 years? Apparently there was enough good to attract him to this life. I hope that people will see you and be attracted to the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, because people are dying. They need this. And we need to keep this the way it was created. So I charge you with that today, fellow warriors and carriers of the message. Hold true to your goal, hold true to the prize, and do what you're supposed to do. Suit up, show up, and keep on marching. Thank you.